Sable Soryn arrived at Ashen Hollow with 2 satchels, a wooden apothecary chest strapped shut by worn leather, and a letter that had already softened at the folds from being opened too many times and closed again as if the words inside might change. The road dipped into a basin where the air turned damp and tasted faintly of soot. Fog pooled low along the ruts like spilled milk, but darker, grayer, heavy enough that it seemed to press against her shins as she walked. The town appeared all at once and not at all, buildings stepping forward in fragments, a slate roof, a crooked chimney, a smear of lamplight in a window even though the afternoon sun was pale and unhurried. Ashen Hollow sat close to the peat flats, hugging itself. No bright banners. No bells. The only movement was the slow sway of lanterns hung under eaves and on iron posts, their flames sheltered behind glass and kept burning as if night were always waiting just beyond the next breath. A man in a grey apron watched her from a doorway as she passed. He didn't wave. He didn't call a greeting. His eyes tracked her like he was measuring how much trouble she would bring with her boots. Sable's mentor had warned her about provincial towns, about the way they looked at newcomers like a bad omen. He had not mentioned the way the fog felt alive. Not moving with the wind, exactly, but shifting when she paused, thinning when she looked straight at it and thickening when she glanced away. She kept walking until she found the address written at the bottom of the letter, a narrow shopfront pressed between a candlemaker and a cooper's shed. The sign above the door was old enough that the paint had cracked into fine scales, but the carved mortar and pestle was still recognizable. Someone had scratched at the bottom with a knife, leaving a half-erased name beneath. Sable ran her thumb over the grooves, then pushed the door open. The inside smelled like dried herbs and cold stone, a scent she could understand. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty. A work table sat beneath a grimy window. There was a stove in the corner with a kettle that had long since lost its shine. The place had been closed for a time, but not abandoned. Dust lay in patient layers, and yet the hinges didn't squeal as if they had been oiled not so long ago. Sable set her chest down and untied it with practiced hands. Her fingers moved before her nerves could catch up, arranging jars, linen, mortar and pestle, brass scales. The familiar weight of tools steadied her. She hung bunches of rosemary and wormwood from a beam. She placed her vials in rows like soldiers. It was how she made a place hers, by giving it order. When she finally sat, breath slowing, she opened the letter again. The script was neat and firm. To the keeper of this door, if you are reading this, I have gone ahead of you into the dark. Do not fear it. Fear is only useful when it teaches you where to place your hands. Ashen Hollow will test you. They do not take kindly to hope. They have reasons. Learn them. You will find a woman there, a midwife, who knows which doors to knock on and which to leave alone. Her name is Lysa Fenro. If she offers you tea, take it. And if anyone tells you not to answer the mist, believe them. Sable read that last line twice. Not answer the mist. She tucked the letter into her coat pocket as if it might keep her warm, then stood and began sweeping. The simple labor made the hours pass. By dusk she had the shelves wiped, the table scrubbed, the stove coaxed into a steady heat. She lit the lantern hanging by the door and watched the flame settle into a bright, calm tongue. Outside, the fog thickened until the street looked like it was trying to forget itself. A soft knock came. Sable wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. A woman stood there with a bundle of candles cradled in her arms, her cheeks flushed from cold. She had hair the color of roasted chestnuts tucked into a scarf, and eyes that missed nothing. Behind her, the candlemaker's shop glowed like a hearth, the kind of light that pulled you closer. New hands, the woman said, as if the words themselves were an assessment. And you've already got your lantern lit. Sable nodded. I'm Sable Soryn. The letter said Lysa Fenro, the woman supplied, shifting the candles. Yes. I heard the apothecary door finally opened. We measure good news here carefully, but we do notice it. Sable smiled despite herself. My mentor told me you'd offer tea. Lysa's mouth twitched. He did he? Bold of him. Come, then. You can't drink your first cup alone. Sable glanced back at her newly arranged jars. Leaving them felt like leaving a patient unfinished, but she forced herself to step out. The fog kissed her face with damp cold, and the lantern in her shop cast a small circle of safety behind her. Lysa's candle shop was warmer than Sable expected. Beeswax and tallow mingled with the sharper scent of pine resin. Molds hung from hooks like bell-shaped fruit. A pot of wax simmered on a low flame. Lysa set the candle bundle down and poured tea from a kettle that looked perpetually ready. They sat at a small table. The tea was bitter, strengthened with something earthy and sweet, chicory, perhaps, and a pinch of dried apple. "You came anyway," Lysa said, as if Sable might have changed her mind on the road. "I needed a place," Sable replied. She kept her voice even. There were ways to admit grief without letting it spill. And the shop was offered. It felt intended. Lysa studied her for a long moment, then looked away toward the window. The glass was fogged from the inside as much as the out. Intended is a dangerous word here. What did my mentor mean about not answering the mist? Sable asked. She tried to make it sound like casual curiosity, like a traveler asking about weather. Lysa's hands tightened around her cup. It means exactly what it says. She lowered her voice. When the fog is thick, it carries sounds. Voices. Sometimes they sound like people you know. Sometimes they sound like people you've lost. If you hear it call you, don't answer. Not out loud. Not under your breath. Not even with a yes meant only for yourself. Sable's skin prickled. That's superstition. Lysa's gaze snapped back, sharp as a pin. It's survival. We don't decorate our fear here, Sable. We live with it. Sable swallowed. Why? What happens if you answer? Lysa's mouth pressed into a line. It learns you. And once it learns you, it will keep trying. And the dead, she paused, then said the next part with the weary certainty of someone reciting a rule she hated. The dead sometimes rise. Sable's mind reached for explanations, swamp gases, fever dreams, mass hysteria. But Lysa didn't look hysterical. She looked like a woman who'd delivered babies by candlelight and buried too many neighbors without time to weep. They rise to haunt? Sable asked. Lysa shook her head. No. Not to haunt. Not to hurt, most times. They rise, to do what they didn't finish. A stitch, a letter, a promise. Some are gentle. Some are not. The fog pushes at them. We keep lanterns lit and doors barred and mouths shut. That's the bargain we know. Bargain. The word snagged on Sable's thoughts. Before she could press further, a clatter sounded outside, wood striking stone, followed by a muffled shout. Lysa went still, listening. The tea in Sable's cup trembled with the vibration. Stay, Lysa said, already standing. Sable stood too, heart quickening. What is it? Lantern down, Lysa murmured. She grabbed a thick shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders. Someone knocked an iron post over. Is that dangerous? Sable asked. Lysa's eyes flicked to the door. In fog like this, everything is dangerous. They stepped outside together. The street was a narrow corridor of light and shadow. Lanterns glowed like amber eyes along the way, each one a small defiance. Farther down, two figures wrestled with a fallen post. The fog around them roiled like breath exhaled by something larger than the street. A third figure approached from the mist, moving with a steady purpose that made the other two look frantic by comparison. He wore a long coat clasped at the throat, and a strip of dark leather crossed his chest, holding a hooked lantern pole and a coil of bright chain. His posture was straight in a way that suggested discipline rather than pride. As he stepped beneath the nearest lantern, the light caught on his face. Silver thread glinted along his jaw and up the side of his neck, scars, but not like any scars Sable had seen. These were clean lines, stitched with something that reflected the light like metal. They disappeared into his collar as if they continued down his chest. Lysa's voice softened. Warden. The man's eyes swept the street, then landed on Sable. The look wasn't hostile. It was worse, it was caution, the kind reserved for open flames near dry straw. Who is she? He asked. Sable Soryn, Lysa replied. The apothecary. The shop has opened again. The man's gaze sharpened at the word apothecary. You chose a poor season. I didn't choose the season, Sable said before she could stop herself. Only the work. His attention flicked to her mouth, as if weighing her tone. Then learn the first rule of Ashen Hollow. In the fog, you keep your voice to yourself. Sable lifted her chin. Lysa told me not to answer the mist. Good. His voice was low, controlled. Do not answer it. Do not call into it. Do not say anyone's name when it is thick enough to swallow the lantern light. One of the men at the fallen post cursed softly. The lantern had rolled, the flame guttering behind its glass. The warden strode to it and set it upright with a practiced motion, shielding it with his body until the flame steadied. He set the post back into its socket and hammered it down with the heel of his boot. The work was efficient, almost gentle, like he didn't want to anger the street by being too rough. Sable watched his hands. They were gloved, but she could see the careful way he moved, as if his joints protested and he refused to show it. What's your name? Sable asked, and immediately regretted it. The fog seemed to lean in. Lysa shot her a warning look. The warden's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, Sable thought he would refuse. Irius Veylan, he said at last, but he said it quietly, close to his own chest, as if he was placing the name somewhere safe rather than releasing it into the air. Warden of the Mistline. The fog shifted. Sable's skin tightened with the sensation that something had heard and taken note. Irius seemed to sense it too. His gaze snapped toward the street's far end. Inside, he said, and there was no arguing in his tone. Both of you. Now. Lysa grabbed Sable's wrist and pulled her back toward the candle shop. Sable stumbled with surprise, then caught herself and moved faster. The fog pressed against her ankles, cool and insistent. As they reached the door, a sound drifted down the street, soft at first, like someone humming under their breath. It was a melody Sable almost recognized, the sort of tune a tired person might sing while sweeping. Lysa froze, fingers white on Sable's wrist. Irius went utterly still, every muscle locked. The humming became words. Sable. Her name slid along the fog like a caress. Sable's chest tightened. For one impossible moment, she smelled her mentor's study ink and dried lavender and heard the scratch of his pen, the soft cough he always tried to hide. The voice was older, warm with amusement and affection. Sable, my girl, it said, gentle as a hand on her shoulder. Don't stand out there. Come inside. You'll catch cold. Tears stung her eyes before she could stop them. Grief was a tide that didn't care where you were standing. Lysa's nails dug into Sable's skin. Don't, she whispered. Don't you dare. Sable's mouth opened on instinct, the reflex to answer a familiar voice stronger than any warning. But Irius moved like a shadow. He stepped between her and the fog, his lantern pole in one hand, his other hand lifted, not touching her, not claiming, but blocking her line of sight. In the lamplight, the silver stitches along his throat flashed. Do not reply, he said, voice razor-thin. Not even a whisper. Breathe. Let it pass. The voice in the fog softened, becoming almost tender. Sable. It's all right. I only want to speak to you. Sable's heart hammered. Her lips trembled. The fog pressed closer, thickening in the doorway. The lantern flame wavered, as if it were afraid. Sable swallowed hard and forced her mouth shut. She breathed in through her nose, tasting wax and tea and fear. She let the voice roll over her without catching it. For a moment, the humming faltered, like a singer disappointed by a silent audience. Then the fog shifted away, retreating down the street as if it had found another door. Lysa's grip loosened. She exhaled shakily. Irius didn't move right away. When he finally lowered his hand, Sable saw that his fingers were trembling, and that his jaw was clenched so tight a vein stood out beneath the silver stitching. You heard it, Sable whispered, and then realized she had spoken. Her breath caught. Irius's eyes snapped to her, hard. But his anger, if it was anger, didn't land on her like punishment. It landed like fear. I heard it, he said. And it heard you. Sable's throat went dry. It used my mentor's voice. It uses whatever works, Irius replied. Whatever makes you forget you have a choice. Sable's eyes burned. Why my name? Why now? Irius looked past her shoulder into the candle shop, where the warm light pooled on the floorboards. His expression tightened, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath the control, something like exhaustion, like a man who had been holding a door shut for too long. "Because you're new," he said. "And because you answered it the moment you arrived in town." Sable's stomach dropped. "I didn't." Irius's gaze held hers, unblinking. "Not out here. Not tonight. But it knows you. That means you replied somewhere it could reach you." Sable's mind raced back over the day, her sweeping, her arranging, the letter in her pocket. She had read it aloud once, just to hear the words settle in her own ear. She had whispered, half amused, half weary, when she'd reached the line about not answering the mist. What had she said? She remembered the sound of her own voice in the empty shop, the way she'd scoffed softly at the warning and murmured, "All right, then." A reply. Her knees threatened to go weak. Lysa swore under her breath, but her eyes were kinder than her words. "Oh, Sable." Irius's face didn't change, but the silver stitches at his throat seemed to catch the light as if they were suddenly tighter. "Listen to me," he said, and the command in his voice was tempered by something else, something like reluctant concern. "You will not speak to any voice you hear in the fog. You will not chase sounds. If you hear crying, you close your door. If you hear your own name, you hold your breath and wait." "That's impossible," Sable whispered. "If someone needs help." "You are not the only one who needs help," Irius cut in, and then, as if aware of how harsh it sounded, he exhaled slowly. "The fog is not a person calling for you. It is a hunger that learned how to shape words." Sable looked at the street again, where the lanterns burned steadily now, as if nothing had happened. The fog lay thick and innocent as wool. "What happens," she asked, voice barely there, "if it learns you too well?" Irius's eyes dropped, just for a heartbeat, to the silver stitching that disappeared into his collar. "Then you become a door," he said. "And Ashen Hollow has had enough doors." Lysa reached for Sable's hand and squeezed. "Come back to my shop tonight," she murmured. "You shouldn't be alone your first night." Sable nodded, numb. "I should lock my door," she said automatically, thinking of the apothecary shelves, the jars, the lantern flame. "Lock it," Irius agreed. "And keep your lantern lit." Sable hesitated. "Will the voice come again?" Irius's gaze sharpened as he looked into the fog. "It will try," he said. "Now that it knows you can hear it, it will try until you forget that silence can be an answer." He turned to leave, cloak brushing the damp air. Then he paused, as if fighting himself. Without looking back, he said, "If anything rises and comes to your door, do not open it." Sable's spine went cold. "You said the dead sometimes rise," she whispered. Irius's voice came quieter, but no less firm. "They do," he said. "And not all of them remember how to be gentle." Then he was gone into the fog, swallowed whole as if the street itself had decided to keep him. Sable stood in the candle shop doorway with Lysa's hand still wrapped around hers, listening to the lanterns hiss softly and the fog breathe. Somewhere far down the street, something scraped against stone, slow, dragging, patient. Sable's heart stuttered. Lysa's grip tightened again. And in the distance, a bell did not ring. No one called out. The town held its breath, as if waiting to see what would finish what it had left undone. Morning came without clearing the fog. It only shifted it from a thick, heavy press to a thinner veil that let outlines show through like charcoal sketches. Sable woke on a pallet in Lysa's back room with her clothes still on and her hair pinned up as if she'd been afraid to loosen any part of herself. For a few heartbeats she lay still, listening. No voices. Just the soft crackle of a candlewick and the distant creak of a sign turning on its chain. She rose, washed her face in water that smelled faintly of iron, and thanked Lysa with a quiet sincerity that surprised her. Lysa only waved a hand as if gratitude was a luxury they couldn't afford, then pressed a small tin into Sable's palm. "Bright salt," Lysa said. "Keep it in your pocket. If you feel the fog in your ears, put a pinch under your tongue. It tastes awful. That's the point." Sable turned the tin over. The lid was stamped with a simple sunburst. "Does it work?" "It helps," Lysa said. "Nothing works perfectly here. But we do what we can." That phrase followed Sable back to her shop. Ashen Hollow streets were quieter in daylight than any town she'd known. People moved with their shoulders hunched, speaking little, mouths close to each other's ears, as if words were a resource to be rationed. Lanterns still burned beneath eaves. A lamplighter boy, thin, wide-eyed, walked with a long pole, checking glass and flame. He glanced at Sable and nearly tripped on a cobble. She offered him a small nod. He stared as if she'd spoken aloud. At her door, Sable paused. Her lantern was still lit, the flame a steady, stubborn thing. She inhaled once, then unlocked the shop. Inside, nothing had been disturbed. Yet the air felt watched. Not by eyes, exactly, but by attention. She kept her movements deliberate as she opened windows a crack, set water to boil, and laid out her tools. She told herself it was only fear putting sensations into the air. Then the first knock came. A woman stood outside with her shawl pulled tight, her cheeks hollowed by sleeplessness. She did not step fully into the doorway, as if the threshold itself might bite. "You're the apothecary," the woman said. "I am," Sable replied. She kept her voice low. "Come in if you like. If you don't, we can speak here." The woman hesitated, then took a half step over the threshold like it cost her. Her hands were wrapped in linen stained with something dark. "It's my husband," she whispered. "He went to the peat flats 3 days ago. They brought him back. He's resting now. But he keeps sitting up. Keeps trying to." Her mouth tightened, and her eyes flooded. "He tries to go out. He tries to go to the shed and fetch his net like it matters more than his own breath." Sable's stomach clenched. "Is he fevered?" "No," the woman swallowed. "His cold." Cold. The word had weight in Ashen Hollow. Sable guided her to the work table. "What's your name?" she asked. The woman flinched, glancing toward the fogged window. Sable caught herself. "Only if you want to tell me," she amended gently. "Inside here, the lantern holds. But I won't press you." The woman exhaled shakily. "Mara." She said it like a confession. "And your husband?" Mara's throat bobbed. "Kel." Sable nodded and reached for her jars, measuring dried valerian, ground ginger, a pinch of crushed peat rose petals for warmth. She added a few grains of bright salt, then hesitated before taking the smallest spoonful of kill ash from a sealed vial. She had brought the ash from her mentor's supplies, clean ash, burned from known wood, not from unknown graves. She remembered the voice in the fog, the way it had sounded like tenderness. She set the vial down. "Not yet. Tell me what happens when he sits up," Sable said, keeping her hands busy. "Does he speak?" Mara shook her head quickly. "No speaking. His eyes are open but empty. Like he's looking past me. He pulls at the blankets, and his hands," she held up her bandaged fingers. "He grabbed me when I tried to stop him. Not hard. Not like anger. Like he couldn't feel he was hurting me." Sable finished steeping the herbs and poured the infusion into a cup. The scent rose warm and sharp. "This will warm his blood," she said. "It might help him settle. And if it doesn't?" Mara whispered. Sable met her gaze. "Then I'll come with you," she said, surprising herself with the certainty. "I'll see what's truly happening." Mara's eyes widened. "The warden won't like that." "Then he can dislike it," Sable replied softly. "But I won't let you face it alone. Word travels in small towns like smoke." By midday, Sable had seen 3 more people, a boy with fog-raw throat who had been coughing all night, a cooper with a hand split open from hammering too quickly, and a trembling young woman who wanted anything, to help her sleep without dreaming of wet footsteps. None of that was unusual. All of it was. Because each patient spoke in fragments, pausing between sentences as if listening for something outside the walls. Because each one flinched when a cartwheel squealed on stone. Because every time Sable asked a name, she saw the same instinctive fear. Names mattered here in a way they did not in other places. In the late afternoon, the lamplighter boy appeared in her doorway, hovering like a frightened moth. He didn't cross the threshold. He clutched his pole with both hands, knuckles pale. "You're the new apothecary," he said. Sable nodded. "Yes." He swallowed. "Warden Veylan says you're not to go to the fog line alone." "That's kind of him to worry," Sable said, though she didn't fully believe it was kindness. The boy's ears reddened. He says it like an order. That sounds more like him, Sable murmured. What's your name? The boy's eyes widened in alarm. Sable lifted her hands slightly, palms up. Only inside, she said. Only if you want. He stood very still, then whispered, Odrin. As if saying it too loudly would draw the fog to the door. Odrin, Sable repeated quietly, letting the name settle in the warmth of her lantern. Thank you. Tell the warden I won't do anything foolish. Odrin looked doubtful, as if he'd been tasked with lying to a storm. He'll come himself, he said. If you do. That's his right, Sable replied. She offered Odrin a small packet of throat-soothing herbs. For the lamplighters, she added. Fog bites. Odrin stared at the packet like it was something precious, then took it and vanished down the street. By early evening, Mara returned, eyes red-rimmed and frantic. It's worse, she whispered, barely inside the door. He keeps sitting up. He keeps turning toward the window, like he hears something. I tried the tea you gave me, he drank it, he did, but it didn't, her voice broke. Please. Sable didn't hesitate. She pulled on her coat, grabbed her satchel, and lit a second lantern, small enough to carry, with thick glass and a steady wick. She took the bright salt tin from her pocket and pressed it into Mara's hand. If you hear anything, Sable murmured, you do not answer. Mara nodded, tears trembling on her lashes. I know. They stepped into the street. The fog had thickened again, as it always did when the sun slid behind the basin's rim. Lanterns glowed like anchors, each one holding a piece of the road in place. The air smelled damp and faintly sweet, like rotting leaves. Mara's house was not far, a low cottage with peat bricks and a door painted a tired blue. Inside, the air was colder than outside, as if warmth had fled. Kel lay on a narrow bed near the hearth. His skin was too pale, his lips tinted faintly grey. His chest rose and fell, he was alive, Sable could tell that. But his eyes were open, unfocused, staring at the ceiling. Sable approached slowly. Kel, she said, and Mara flinched at the name, but the cottage was closed and lit. Sable touched the back of Kel's hand. It was cool, but not frozen. His pulse was present, slow, steady, stubborn. His fingers twitched. Then, as if pulled by a thread, Kel's head turned toward the window. Sable followed his gaze. Outside, fog pressed against the glass, blurring the lantern-lit street into a soft smear. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a shadow passed close, and someone, scraped fingertips along the pane. Mara made a small sound of terror. Sable held up a hand. Don't, she whispered, not sure whether she meant the sound or the urge to speak. The scraping came again, slower, almost patient. Kel's fingers tightened around Sable's. His mouth opened. No words came out, just a breath that steamed in the cold air. Sable's heart pounded. Mara, she murmured without looking away from Kel, has he spoken at all since he came back? Mara shook her head, lips pressed together. Sable leaned closer, watching Kel's eyes. They were not empty. They were distant. Focused on something just out of reach. Kel, Sable said softly, can you hear me? His gaze flickered toward her for the briefest instant, like a lantern flame catching, then slid back to the window. The scratching stopped. A voice drifted through the glass, muffled but unmistakable. Male. Familiar. Kel, it said. Open. Mara's face went white. She clapped a hand over her mouth to keep from answering, or from screaming. Sable's skin went prickly with cold. The voice was too close, too real. It sounded like Kel's brother, perhaps, or a friend. Kel, it coaxed again. Just open the latch. I'm here. Kel's body tensed. He began to sit up, movements jerky, as if his joints were being guided by an impatient hand. Sable pressed her palm gently to his chest. No, she whispered, not to the voice, but to Kel. Stay. His eyes slid to her. For a moment she saw fear there, real fear, human fear, trapped behind the distant glaze. Sable's mind flashed to the old principle she had learned in fieldwork: when a person is half-drowned, you don't shout. You give them something steady to hold. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small vial of clear infusion, valerian, ginger, bright salt, and something else she had added on instinct from her own stores, a pinch of crushed peat rose and a thread of saffron for warmth and clarity. She held it to Kel's lips. "Drink," she murmured. "Just a little." Kel's mouth worked. The liquid spilled at first, then he swallowed. The muscles in his throat moved, slow and reluctant. Outside, the voice changed. It softened into a plea. "Kel," it said, and Sable felt it tug at the room like a hook. "Mara's alone. She needs you. Don't leave her to the cold." Mara's shoulders shook. Kel's hand tightened painfully around Sable's fingers. Sable's own throat tightened too, because the voice was using truth. Mara was alone. Kel did love her. The fog didn't need lies. It only needed longing. Sable forced herself to breathe. She loosened her grip on Kel's hand, then replaced it with a different touch, her fingers over his wrist, steadying his pulse. "Kel," she whispered, "if you can hear me, squeeze once." Nothing. The voice outside grew firmer, impatient. "Kel. Open." Kel's body jerked again, trying to rise. Sable's mind reached for her tools, for rules, for logic. Warmth draughts to calm. Bright salt to clear. But none of it addressed the true force in the room, a demand. The fog was not trying to kill Kel. It was trying to use him. Sable stood, keeping one hand on Kel's shoulder, and moved toward the window. Mara made a panicked gesture. Sable shook her head. She did not touch the latch. She did not look too hard into the fog. She lifted her lantern instead, bringing the flame closer to the glass, letting light press against the dark. "I won't answer you," she said softly, voice directed into the room, not outward. "Not that way." The fog on the other side thickened, as if offended. The voice shifted, subtle, almost too quick to notice. It became smoother. "Sable," it said, and her stomach dropped. "Open." Mara's eyes widened. "It knows you," she mouthed. Sable's mouth went dry. The voice was not her mentor now. It was not Kel's friend. It was simply speaking her name with authority, like it had always owned it. Sable felt the instinct to respond rise like a reflex. She bit the inside of her cheek, tasting copper. Behind her, Kel made a low sound, almost a moan. Sable turned and went back to him quickly, keeping the lantern between herself and the window. "Look at me," she whispered, leaning close. "Kel, look at me." His gaze flickered again, caught on her face, then slid away. The glaze was still there, but it trembled, like ice beginning to crack. Sable reached for her satchel and pulled out a small cloth pouch of dried herbs, then hesitated. It wasn't enough. She needed a stronger anchor, something that could tie Kel to his own will long enough for him to finish what he was being pulled toward. Finish what he left undone. Sable's mind seized on it. "Mara," she whispered, "what was he doing before he went to the peat flats? What was he worried about? What did he say he needed to do?" Mara blinked rapidly, struggling through fear. He was mending the net," she said. "He promised he'd fix the tear near the lead line. He said it would snag, and he didn't want," her voice broke. "He didn't want Odrin's father to lose fish because of him." Odrin's father. A debt. An unfinished task. Sable nodded, heart hammering. "Where is the net?" Mara pointed toward the shed, barely visible through the back door's small window. "Out there." The scraping on the front window resumed, louder now, as if irritated by their talking. Sable's pulse raced. Going outside in fog was exactly what Irius had warned against. But leaving the net undone was keeping Kel tethered. If she could help him complete it, if she could bring the task to him, perhaps the pull would lessen. Sable looked at Mara. "Do you trust me?" she asked, voice low. Mara's eyes filled. "I don't know what else to do." Sable nodded once. She took the bright salt tin and tucked it into her own pocket, then wrapped her scarf tight and lifted her lantern. "Stay by him," she told Mara. "Keep the hearth going. If you hear anything, you do not answer. Even if it sounds like me." Mara's face crumpled. "Sable." "I'm not leaving," Sable whispered fiercely. "I'm getting what he needs to finish." She stepped through the back door. The fog outside was thicker, colder. It swallowed the yard, turning the shed into a dim block of shadow. Sable kept her lantern raised, walking slowly, counting her steps, refusing to look into the deepest pockets of mist. She did not speak. She did not even whisper encouragement to herself. Silence felt like holding her breath underwater. At the shed door, she paused, listening. No voice. Just a faint drip of water from the eaves. She pulled the door open. Inside, the smell of damp rope and old fish hit her. Her lantern light swept over hooks and barrels. The net lay on a table, half-mended, needle and twine still threaded through a torn mesh. Sable's fingers trembled as she grabbed the net. It was heavier than she expected, wet with fog. As she turned to leave, a sound rose behind her, so soft at first it might have been her own breath. Sable. Her name again, close to her ear, too close. Her skin went cold. The fog had followed her into the shed without moving, as if it could be everywhere at once. Sable, the voice murmured, sweet as honey. You don't have to be afraid. Just say yes. Sable's throat tightened. Her mouth wanted to answer, wanted to ask what it meant, wanted to bargain like a frightened child. She bit down hard on her tongue until the pain sharpened her thoughts. She did not speak. She clutched the net to her chest, lifted her lantern, and walked out of the shed with her jaw clenched and her eyes fixed on the small circle of light. Behind her, the voice sighed, almost disappointed. When she reached the cottage, she shut the back door and leaned against it for a heartbeat, breath shaking. She forced herself to swallow a pinch of bright salt. It burned, harsh and bitter, snapping her senses into focus. Inside, Kell had sat up. Mara was struggling to hold him, tears streaming down her face. His hands clawed toward the front of the house, toward the window where the voice still coaxed. Sable crossed the room quickly and dropped the net onto Kell's lap. His eyes jerked down. For the first time, his gaze sharpened fully. It locked onto the torn mesh, the needle still threaded. His hands, shaking, reached for it like it was the only real thing left in the world. The voice outside changed again, turning sharp. No, it hissed, muffled through the glass. Kell didn't look up. His fingers fumbled, then found the needle. He pushed it through the net's torn edge, pulling twine through with slow determination. His breaths came in ragged pulls. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Sable watched, heart in her throat. She didn't dare speak. She simply steadied the net so it wouldn't slide and guided his hands when they slipped, doing it with the care she would give a wounded man trying to stitch his own skin. Kell's stitches were crooked, but they held. When he tied off the final knot, his shoulders sagged. He released the needle, and his eyes fluttered. The cold in the room eased, subtle but real. The lantern flame steadied. Even the fog pressing at the window seemed to loosen, as if it had lost a grip. Kell fell back onto the pillow, breathing shallow but human. Mara sobbed, covering her mouth with both hands, her body shaking with relief. Sable exhaled slowly, pulse thundering in her ears. She reached up and wiped sweat from her own brow, then realized her hands were trembling too. A knock came at the front door, hard, commanding. Sable and Mara froze. Another knock. Open, a man's voice said. Not the fog's coaxing. Not a mimic. Real, low, edged with anger. Irius. Mara stared at Sable in panic. Sable swallowed. She crossed to the door and opened it just enough to see out. Irius stood on the threshold, lantern pole in hand, fog clinging to his coat. His eyes flicked past Sable, taking in the room with quick precision, the cold air, the net on the bed, Kell's slack body, Mara's tear-streaked face. His jaw tightened. I told you, he said, voice like stone, not to go out. Sable met his gaze, steadying herself. And I told Odrin I wouldn't do anything foolish, she replied quietly. I lied. Irius's eyes flashed, but beneath the anger was something else, fear that had nowhere to go. You went into the fog, he said, each word controlled. Alone. I went into a shed, Sable replied. 5 steps from a warm hearth. That is enough, Irius snapped, then caught himself. His gaze slid to Kell again, and something in his expression shifted, reluctant acknowledgement. What did you do? He asked, voice lower. Sable glanced at Kell, then back at Irius. He was being pulled toward the door, she said softly. Not to haunt. Not to hurt. To finish what he left undone. So I brought it to him. Irius stared at her as if he'd never heard someone speak about the dead with such plain compassion. That's not how we handle returnings, he said. No, Sable agreed. It's how you endure them. But endurance isn't the same as healing. For a moment, the only sound was Kel's shallow breathing and Mara's quiet sobs. Outside, the fog pressed against the lantern light, listening. Irius stepped inside, shutting the door behind him with careful deliberation, as if sealing them into a safer world. The silver stitching at his throat caught the lantern glow, and Sable saw, with sudden clarity, that the lines weren't only scars. They were restraint. He looked at Mara. Keep him warm, he said, voice gentler. If he rises again tonight, send Odrin for me. Do not open the door for any voice. Mara nodded rapidly. Irius turned back to Sable. His gaze was hard, but his voice was quieter. You understand what you did tonight, he said. It wasn't a question. Sable swallowed. I understand I chose to help, she replied. Irius's jaw flexed. You chose to be seen, he said. By it. Sable felt a chill crawl up her spine. The voice in the shed. Her name in the fog. The way it had seemed pleased she could hear. I didn't answer, she whispered. Irius's eyes held hers. Not with your mouth, he said. But you listened. And listening is how it finds the shape of you. Sable's hands clenched. Then what do I do? She demanded softly, anger sparking through fear. Let people be pulled until they break. Bar doors and burn lantern oil and hope the fog grows bored. Irius's expression flickered, pain, quick and well hidden. We do what keeps the town alive, he said. And what keeps you alive? Sable asked before she could stop herself. The words landed between them like a dropped match. Irius went still. For a heartbeat, the silver stitching at his throat seemed to glint brighter, as if tightened by something inside him. Sable regretted the question instantly. It was too intimate. Too close to whatever he kept locked behind discipline. But Irius didn't leave. He didn't lash out. He only looked at her with an intensity that made her feel like he was seeing her for the first time, not as a risk, but as a force. You don't know this place, he said quietly. Then show me, Sable replied, voice just as quiet. Irius's gaze dropped, as if weighing the cost of letting her close. When he looked up again, there was a decision in his eyes. If you insist on doing this, he said, you do it with me. No more stepping into fog alone. No more taking voices at face value. You will learn the lines. You will learn the rules. And you will stop saying names when the air tastes like wet ash. Sable's pulse steadied, just slightly, at the promise implicit in the command, he would be there. All right, she said, and this time she did not whisper it into emptiness. She said it to a man standing in lantern light, real and solid. Irius's gaze flicked toward the window, as if checking whether the fog had heard. Then he looked back at her, and his voice dropped to a near murmur. And Sable, he added. She held her breath. If you hear me call for you from the mist, he said, you will not answer. Sable's throat tightened. Irius. No, he said, gently but firmly. Promise. The request was strange in its intimacy, a trust offered in the shape of fear. Sable nodded once. I promise, she whispered, and felt the vow settle inside her like a small stone, heavy, steady, real. Outside, the fog pressed close to the glass, silent as a listener denied its song. The next days taught Sable that Ashen Hollow did not run on hours so much as it ran on vigilance. By morning, people came to her door in ones and twos, always with their shoulders hunched and their words kept close. She brewed warming draughts with ginger and peat rose and bright salt, taught mothers to rub resin on their children's chests to keep the fog bite from settling deep, and stitched split knuckles by lantern light because no one trusted daylight to stay. By evening, she waited. Not idly. Never idly. She cleaned her table twice, reordered jars that were already in order, and kept her ears tuned the way a healer keeps fingers on a pulse, alert for the smallest change. Irius came when the fog thickened, as he'd promised. He didn't announce himself with knocks anymore. He appeared in her doorway like the shape of a decision, lantern pole in hand, coat damp with mist. He would stand just inside the threshold, letting her lantern light claim him before he spoke. "You set your wards wrong," he said the first time, pointing with the end of his pole to the line of salt she had poured beneath her windows. Sable frowned. "It's salt." "It's a question," he corrected. "Salt is only salt until you place it as a boundary. A boundary has a start and an end. Yours loops too close to the glass." Sable's pride prickled. "Then show me." He did, grudgingly at first. He taught her the mist-line marks carved into old stones, little notches that meant safety if the fog surged. He showed her how lantern light could be directed, angled, made into a corridor instead of a circle. He made her practice keeping her breath steady when a voice drifted too near, because panic made the body respond, and the mist fed on reflex. In return, she learned his tells. The way his shoulders rose a fraction when a voice came too close. The way his gaze slid sideways, never straight into the densest pockets of fog. The way his jaw clenched when he heard a name spoken too freely. Sometimes, when she handed him a cup of tea at her work table, his gloved fingers would hesitate before taking it, like accepting warmth felt perilous. Sable never pushed. She simply offered and waited, letting him choose. It was how their closeness grew, not in grand declarations, but in small permissions. One night, a remnant came to her door. Sable knew before she saw it. The air changed. Lantern flame tightened. The fog pressed at the cracks like damp cloth. She and Irius stood shoulder to shoulder behind the threshold, both holding still. A knock sounded, slow, careful, almost polite. Irius lifted his lantern pole, ready. Sable touched his sleeve, a silent request. Not to stop him. Just to be allowed to try first. Irius's eyes flicked to her hand. For a heartbeat, he looked like he might pull away. Then, with visible effort, he didn't. He only nodded once. Sable opened the door a handspan. A woman stood there, soaked with fog. Her dress hung heavy, and ash smeared her fingers as if she had clawed her way out of an old kill. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, staring past Sable's shoulder into the warmth of the shop. Her lips moved, but no sound came out, only a thin exhale that smoked in the cold. Sable's throat tightened with sympathy. "You're safe here," she said softly, directing her words into the lantern light, not into the street. "You can come in if you want. Only if you want." The woman's head tilted as if she could almost understand. One hand lifted, trembling, and pointed toward the corner where Sable had stacked a bundle of clean cloth. Sable followed the gesture. There, half hidden beneath the cloth, was a small, wooden box she hadn't noticed before, a child's trinket chest, carved with a sunburst and worn smooth by years of small hands. Sable's breath caught. She hadn't brought that. Irius went rigid beside her, his presence turning sharp as a blade. Sable stepped toward the box slowly, then looked back at the remnant. "Is that what you need?" she asked, voice gentle. The woman's lips parted. A whisper fell out, thin as thread. "Hush, song." Sable turned the box over, fingers careful. Inside were scraps, a ribbon, a cracked bead, a folded bit of paper with smudged writing. And at the bottom, a tiny whistle carved from bone. A lullaby whistle, the kind mothers used when their throats were too raw to sing. Sable lifted it. The woman's eyes fixed on it like a starving person seeing bread. Irius's voice was low, warning. "Do not blow it." Sable paused. She could feel why. Sound carried. Sound invited. But the woman was not asking for a performance. She was asking for completion. Sable took a pinch of bright salt and rubbed it along the whistle's mouthpiece, then held it out. "Take it," she said. "Finish what you need to finish." The woman's fingers closed around it with desperate reverence. She lifted it to her lips. A note drifted out, not loud, not calling, just a soft, trembling tone that barely made it past the threshold. The lantern flame steadied. The fog eased, just slightly, as if disappointed by how small and contained the sound was. The woman's shoulders slumped. Something loosened in her face. Her eyes cleared for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat she looked startlingly alive, tired, sorrowful, grateful. "Thank you," she whispered, and then her knees buckled. Sable lunged forward, catching her before she hit the stones. The remnant weighed less than she should have, like ash in human shape. Sable's arms tightened instinctively, cradling her. The woman's body cooled, then softened, then seemed to thin. Not rotting, not collapsing, but dissolving, like fog turning back into fog. Sable held on until there was nothing left to hold. When she straightened, her eyes burned. Irius watched her with an expression she could not name. She passed, Sable whispered. Irius swallowed. The silver stitching at his throat glinted as he spoke. They don't usually, he said quietly. Not like that. Then maybe they can, Sable replied, voice shaking. If someone helps them finish. Irius looked away into the street, lantern held high. Or if someone teaches them the difference between being called and being released. The next day, the town council summoned Sable. They did it indirectly at first, messages sent by boys too young to understand what they were carrying, notes shoved beneath her door, strangers pausing outside her shop to stare as if staring could make her leave. On the third day, Brannick Holt arrived himself with 2 men and a woman who looked like she had forgotten how to smile. He stood on Sable's threshold without crossing it, eyes taking inventory of her jars like a man pricing goods. You've been stirring the town, he said. Sable kept her hands steady as she wiped her mortar. I've been treating the town. Brannick's mouth tightened. We have ways here. Quiet ways. You are encouraging conversation. Sable's gaze held his. With the living. Mostly. Brannick's eyes narrowed. Don't play clever. The dead rise more often since you came. Sable felt heat flare in her chest. They rose before I arrived. Brannick said. But we kept it contained. Now people speak of you like you're a remedy. Like you can fix what we've endured for generations. He leaned in slightly. Hope makes people careless. Hope, spoken like a curse. You want me gone, Sable said. I want my town stable, Brannick replied smoothly. If that requires you to close your door until you learn discretion, so be it. Sable's fingers curled around her rag. And if I don't? Brannick's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then the warden will enforce our decision. Sable's gaze slid past him to where Irius stood at the corner of the street, half in fog, half in lantern light. He had been there since Brannick arrived. Silent. Watching. Guarding her, the shop, the space between. Brannick followed her look and scoffed. He'll choose duty. He always does. The councilman left. The street swallowed their footsteps. Sable waited until the last shadow was gone, then stepped outside. Irius didn't move from his post. You shouldn't stand in the open, he said. Sable crossed to him anyway. They think I'm making it worse, she murmured. They'll try to shut me down. Irius's jaw tightened. They are afraid of losing the only control they understand. And you? Sable asked softly. Are you afraid of me? He looked at her then, truly looked, and the answer in his eyes made her throat tighten. I'm afraid of what the mist will do with you, he said. That's different. Sable breathed out slowly. Then help me, she whispered. Not just with rules. With truth. Irius stared at the fog for a long moment as if it were a witness he didn't trust. Then he turned slightly, angling his body so his voice would fall into the shelter of his own lantern light. Not here, he said. Come to the mist-lined stones. Sable's heart stuttered. Tonight. Irius nodded once. Before the fog decides to teach you its own lessons. That evening, they walked to the edge of town where the road fell away into peat flats and black water. Old stones stood half-sunken in the muck, carved with notches and strange, looping marks. Lanterns hung from iron hooks driven into the stone, their flames trembling but steady. The fog out there had no walls to stop it. It moved like a living thing, slow and patient. It pressed close, as if curious about 2 small lights daring to exist. Irius set his lantern pole into the ground and stood with his hands clasped behind him, posture rigid. Sable watched him, noticing how his shoulders were too tight, how the silver stitching at his throat caught the flame. You don't have to tell me anything you can't, Sable said quietly. Irius's breath hitched. I can, he said. I don't want to. Sable waited. He spoke without looking at her. When I was 9, The fog came into our house. It was thicker then. Hung for days. His voice stayed controlled, but there was something strained beneath it. My sister Irwen was sick. Fever. Mother was asleep in a chair beside her bed because she refused to leave her. Sable's chest tightened at the name. Irius swallowed. I heard Irwen's voice from the kitchen. He continued. Clear as day. She called my name. Said she was hungry. Said she wanted apple bread. Sable felt a cold crawl up her spine. But she was in bed, she whispered. He nodded once, sharp. She was. But the voice sounded like her. I was a child. I wanted to help. I wanted to believe she was getting better. His shoulders rose, then fell. So I answered. The lantern flame flickered, as if the fog liked the confession. Sable clenched her hands to keep from reaching for him too soon. What did you say? Irius's jaw clenched. I said yes. His voice was almost a rasp. I said I was coming. Sable's breath caught. I opened the kitchen door, he said, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the lantern's reach. And the fog moved like it was pleased. It didn't rush. It didn't howl. It just came in. Quiet. Patient. His fingers curled behind his back. Irwen stopped breathing that night. Not with a struggle. Just gone. Sable's eyes burned. Irius. He flinched at his own name, as if the sound hurt. The silver stitching at his throat seemed to tighten, a subtle shift that made his swallow look painful. I heard her voice again after, he said. Sometimes outside the window. Sometimes from the road. Calling. Crying. Begging. I never answered again. His shoulders shook once, barely. But it didn't matter. It had my reply. It had learned me. Sable stepped closer, moving slowly so he wouldn't feel trapped. And the stitches, she whispered, gaze flicking to the shining lines. Irius's breath went shallow. They're a bind, he said. A ward carved into flesh. The old healer who came after, she said my heart had become a hinge. A place the mist could pull at. His mouth tightened. She stitched me shut. Sable's stomach turned. Without your consent. He gave a short, bitter laugh with no humor. I was a boy. Consent wasn't a word anyone used. Sable's hands trembled. She wanted to touch the stitched lines, to soothe them like she had soothed wounds in 100 places, but she remembered what mattered here, permission. May I? She asked softly, lifting her hand a few inches, not yet touching. Irius's gaze snapped to her, startled. As if the question itself was unfamiliar. His throat worked. The silver glinted. After a long heartbeat, he nodded once. Sable's fingertips brushed his collar, featherlight. She felt the raised thread-like scars beneath, cool and unyielding. Not just healed wounds, something placed there deliberately, something meant to hold. Her touch was gentle, reverent. You've been carrying this alone, she whispered. Irius's eyes shuttered. His breath shook. That's the point, he said, but the words sounded like something he'd been taught, not something he believed. Sable's hand slid away, giving him space again. Then you don't have to carry it alone anymore, she said. The fog pressed closer, as if offended. A voice drifted through the dark, soft, familiar, heartbreakingly sweet. Iri, it called, using a childish shortening meant for a sister's mouth. Iri, come home. Irius went white. His entire body locked. The silver stitching at his throat caught the lantern light and seemed to flare. Sable's blood turned to ice. The voice was perfect. Not an echo. Not a crude imitation. It sounded like love. Irius's lips parted on a breath. Sable moved instantly, stepping in front of him, not touching his mouth, not restraining him, but placing herself where his eyes could catch on her instead of the fog. Irius, she whispered, voice steady, spoken into the lantern's shelter. Look at me. His eyes were wide, wet, terrified. He was shaking. The voice called again, closer. Iri, please. It's cold. Sable felt her own throat tighten with grief she didn't own, grief the fog was trying to lend her so she would respond. She swallowed hard, tasting bright salt that wasn't there. You don't have to prove anything to it, she whispered. You don't have to answer to a tone. Irius's breath shuddered. His gaze clung to her face like a drowning man clings to driftwood. The voice shifted, growing sharper. Warden, it hissed, the sweetness peeling away. Door. The lantern flame wavered. Sable's heart hammered. She did not answer the voice. She did not plead with it. She simply kept her eyes on Irius and spoke the only words that mattered. Choose, she whispered to him. Not out of fear. Out of yourself. For a long second, Irius trembled on the edge of a reply. Then he closed his mouth. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped beneath the silver stitching. He sucked in a breath through his nose, slow, controlled like he had practiced for years. The fog made a sound like a frustrated exhale. The voice faded, retreating into the dark. Irius's knees nearly buckled. Sable caught his arm, not his wrist, not his hand, but the solid anchor of his forearm through his coat. He didn't pull away. He stood there, shaking, eyes squeezed shut, as if the act of not answering had taken everything. Sable stayed beside him, silent, letting her presence be a boundary rather than a demand. When he finally opened his eyes, they were raw. It will do that again, he said hoarsely. I know, Sable whispered. His gaze searched her face, as if looking for disgust, fear, blame. Sable gave him none of it. Only steadiness. I answered once too, she said quietly, because truth mattered between them. In my shop. I scoffed at the warning and whispered a reply into emptiness. That's how it learned me. She swallowed. I hate that it can use what we love. But I won't let it own our love. Not yours. Not mine. Something shifted in Irius then, small, barely visible. Like a locked door easing open a fraction. Before he could respond, a distant sound rolled across the peat flats, a low, wet dragging, multiplied, one scrape becoming many. Sable's skin went cold. She turned toward the town. Lanterns bobbed in the fog like frantic fireflies. A shout carried faintly, clipped by distance. Warden! Warden! Odrin's voice. Irius's head snapped up. The old discipline slammed back into place, but Sable could see the strain beneath it now, the cost. They're rising, Irius said, already reaching for his pole. More than one. They ran back toward Ashen Hollow with lantern light bouncing and fog swallowing the edges of the road. As they neared the first houses, Sable heard it, doors rattling, people whispering prayers through clenched teeth, the unmistakable sound of slow footsteps on stone, many sets, uneven, patient. At the center street, a crowd had gathered behind a lantern line. Faces pale, mouths covered. Brannick Holt stood with the councilwoman, pointing, shouting orders no one seemed able to follow. Beyond the lantern line, shapes moved in the fog, figures drifting into view one by one as if the town itself was exhaling them. A man with a broken neck trying to straighten it with jerking hands. A girl dragging a basket with rotted apples, eyes fixed on the market stall. An old woman walking steadily toward a door that had been boarded shut. And in the midst of them, a young man Sable recognized from her shop, eyes glazed, hands outstretched, moving not toward a task but toward the nearest warm body. Panic snapped through the crowd like dry tinder. His coming, someone cried. A woman screamed. The young man lunged, not with hunger but with blind insistence, fingers grasping. Sable didn't think. She stepped forward before the lantern line could stop her. No, she called, not to the fog, not to a voice, but to the living people about to break into chaos. Hold the line. Don't run. Don't answer anything you hear. Irius caught her sleeve, yanking her back a fraction. Sable. I can help, she hissed, eyes on the young man's frantic hands. He's tethered to something. He's not trying to hurt, he's trying to finish. Irius's grip tightened. His face was hard, but his eyes flicked to the remnants with quick calculation. Then, through clenched teeth, he said, stay in the lantern light. Do nothing without me. Agreed, Sable said, and felt an odd flare of relief. Partnership, even here. Sable grabbed her satchel and pulled out a vial of warming draught. She poured it into a cup Odrin thrust at her with shaking hands. Give this to him, she said. Slowly. Let him taste it. Odrin swallowed hard. He won't listen. He might, Sable said, then lowered her voice. Speak first. Don't answer anything he says. Just tell him where he is. Odrin nodded, terrified but trying. Irius lifted his lantern pole and stepped forward, moving along the lantern line like a man placing himself between hunger and home. The silver stitching at his throat glinted as he spoke in a controlled, carrying voice. Hold your doors, he ordered the town. No names. No replies. Lanterns high. Sable worked fast, scanning each remnant for the shape of their tether. The old woman at the boarded door, her hands reached for a latch that wasn't there. Sable pointed. That one, she needs the key, she murmured to Irius. Find whoever has it. Bring it into the light. Let her see it. Irius barked an order. A trembling man produced a ring of keys. They were brought forward. The old woman's head lifted. Her lips moved. Sable leaned in, keeping her voice soft and contained. You're safe, she said. You can take it. Finish. The old woman's fingers closed around the key ring. For a moment, she looked almost peaceful. Then she turned away from the boarded door and walked into the fog, clutching the keys to her chest like a lullaby. One by one, Sable and Irius worked, she naming tasks, he holding boundaries. It was a dance of restraint and compassion, and Sable could feel the town watching, stunned, as if seeing a different way to survive. Then the fog shifted. A voice rose, louder than the rest, not a coaxing whisper, but a command shaped like grief. Sable. Her name rang out from the thickest pocket of mist, where lantern light could not reach. People in the crowd flinched, eyes snapping to her. Sable's pulse spiked. The instinct to answer surged up like a cough. She closed her mouth hard, jaw aching. Irius's gaze cut to her, sharp. Don't, he said, almost soundless. The voice came again, softer now, wrapped in warmth. My girl, it said, her mentor's cadence perfect. You're doing so well. Come closer. I need to tell you something. Sable's eyes stung. The fog was using pride now, not fear. It was clever. She forced her gaze away from the dark and fixed it on the lantern flame, on the way it leaned but did not go out. I'm here, she whispered, not into the fog, but into her own chest, anchoring herself. I'm here. The voice sighed, disappointed. And then, like a knife turned, it shifted. Eerie, it called again, that childhood shortening, sweet as poison. Warden. Door. Irius's shoulders jerked as if struck. Sable's stomach dropped. The mist was not satisfied with her silence. It wanted his. It pressed, not with a shout, but with relentless intimacy. Irwen's voice, close, pleading, the sound of a sister wanting to be found. Irius's breath hitched. The silver stitching at his throat glinted as if tightening with every syllable. Sable stepped closer, keeping herself in his line of sight. She didn't grab him. She didn't command. She did the only thing she knew that the mist couldn't counterfeit. She offered choice. Irius, she whispered, voice steady. Look at me. His eyes, wide, wet, found hers. Stay with me, she said. Not because you have to. Because you want to. For a heartbeat, everything held, the crowd, the lanterns, the fog, the dead on the edge of finishing. Then Irius swallowed, pain flashing across his face as the silver stitching pulled. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, refusing the voice with every fiber of discipline he owned. The fog hissed angry, thwarted. And the remnants, as if sensing the seam tightening, began to still. A basket dropped. A hand fell. A dragging foot paused. Sable's lungs burned with the breath she'd been holding. Behind them, Brannick Holt spoke in a low, furious voice. See. This is what I mean. It calls her. It calls him. They are making us a stage. Sable turned, fire sparking through fear. We are keeping people from being hurt, she snapped. Brannick's eyes were cold. You're making the warden vulnerable. Irius's gaze flicked toward Brannick, hard as flint. Enough, he said. The single word silenced the councilman like a slap. For a moment, Sable saw the town look at Irius differently, not just as a stern guardian, but as a man standing between them and something that knew his name too well. The crowd dispersed in shaken silence. Doors closed. Lanterns were checked. The town exhaled. Sable and Irius stood alone in the street after, the fog licking at the edges of their light. Odrin approached, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Warden." They listened to her, he said, half in awe, half in fear. Irius looked at Sable. Something unreadable crossed his face, respect, maybe, or reluctant gratitude, tangled with dread. "Sable," he said quietly, "go inside." She started to protest. Then she saw how pale he was beneath the lantern glow, how tightly he held his jaw, how the silver stitching at his throat seemed to shine with strain. "Irius," she whispered. His gaze met hers, and in it she saw the truth he hadn't said aloud. The fog had nearly pulled him. Not into the mist line, not into madness, but into a single syllable that would have opened the seam. "I need air," he said, but his voice was not steady. Sable moved closer. "Then take it," she murmured. "In here." In the light. He hesitated on the threshold of her shop as if it were an intimacy he didn't deserve. Then, with visible effort, he stepped inside. Sable shut the door and latched it, then turned the lantern higher. The warmth gathered around them, small and stubborn. Irius stood very still, hands clenched at his sides. Sable took a slow breath. "What happens to you," she asked softly, "when you answer?" His throat worked. The silver stitching glinted. "I don't know," he admitted, voice hoarse. "But I've felt it tug. Like," he swallowed, eyes closing for a heartbeat. "Like my chest wants to open." Sable's skin prickled with fear for him. "That's why you won't let anyone close," she said, not accusing, understanding. He didn't deny it. Sable stepped closer, careful. "I won't be another voice in your fog," she whispered. "I won't ask you to be brave for me. I'll ask you to be honest with me." Irius's breath shuddered. "Honesty hurts," he said. "Then we'll do it slowly," Sable replied. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, like a man stepping onto thin ice, Irius lifted his gloved hand and set it lightly on the edge of Sable's worktable, anchoring himself. "My sister's name was Irwen," he said again, quieter. "I haven't spoken it in years." Sable's eyes burned. "Thank you for trusting me with it," she whispered. Irius's gaze held hers. There was something in it then raw, unguarded, like a door cracking open a fraction in lantern light. "I don't know what you are doing to this town," he said softly, voice rough. "But when you speak to them, when you help them finish, the fog pulls back." For a moment. Sable swallowed. "Then maybe we can learn how to make it pull back longer," she whispered. Irius's jaw clenched, and fear flickered through his eyes. "Or maybe it's letting us think we're winning." Sable's heart hammered. She didn't dismiss the fear. She couldn't. Instead, she reached out slowly, asking with her eyes first the way she had learned to with him. He didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. But he didn't step away. So Sable's fingers brushed the back of his gloved hand, just a whisper of contact, warmth offered, not taken. Irius's breath caught. The silver stitching at his throat glinted, and for a terrifying instant Sable thought it would tighten, punish him for the closeness. But it didn't. He stayed. And in that small, trembling stillness, hand to hand, lantern burning steady, Sable understood with sudden clarity that the curse was not only in the fog outside. It lived in the fear that kept Irius stitched shut. And if the mist wanted his heart as a door, then what she was offering him, slow, consented warmth, might be the first real lock he'd ever had. The council moved faster after the mass rising, as if fear had finally found a spine. Sable felt it in small things first. A merchant who had once nodded at her now looked away. A woman who had begged for sleep draughts came to the door and then turned back without knocking. Even Lysa's candle shop grew quieter, as if people were afraid that warmth itself might be evidence of disloyalty. On the fourth morning after the procession, a notice was nailed to Sable's apothecary door. No wax seal. No flourish. Just blunt ink on cheap paper. By order of the Council of Ashen Hollow, the apothecary practice at this address is suspended until such time as the warden deems the risk contained. No gatherings. No late-night consultations. No distribution of salts, tinctures, or farewell tonics. Violations will be met with enforcement. Sable stared at the words until they blurred. Inside, her shelves waited jars she had filled with careful remedies, packets tied with clean twine, a row of bright salt tins stamped with Lysa's sunburst. Tools meant for healing, treated like contraband. Footsteps scraped behind her. Odrin stood at the edge of the street, pole in his hands, face pale. He didn't come closer. He looked like someone caught between duty and decency. They sent me, he whispered. Sable peeled the notice off the door slowly, keeping her breathing even. Did you nail it up too? She asked, not unkindly. Odrin flinched. No. Councilman Holt did. I tried to tell him that I kept people alive. Sable supplied. Odrin's eyes filled. That you kept them from panicking, he said. That you kept the line. Sable's throat tightened. She folded the notice and tucked it into her apron pocket like a thorn she couldn't remove yet. Where is Irius? She asked. Odrin swallowed. At the council hall. Sable's stomach went cold. Alone. He went when they summoned him, Odrin said, voice wavering. He told me to keep the lanterns checked and, his gaze flicked to her door. And to make sure you stayed inside. Sable's jaw clenched. The council wasn't asking Irius for judgment. They were pressing him into being their blade. She pushed her door open and stepped inside. The apothecary's warmth greeted her like a stubborn friend. She lit her inner lantern higher and began moving quietly, decisively, gathering what she could carry. A satchel of herbs, a vial of bright salt, a small bottle of her clearest warming draught. Not to distribute. Not to defy. To be ready. Odrin hovered at the threshold, wide-eyed. You're not supposed to. I'm not gathering a crowd, Sable said softly. I'm gathering sense. Odrin's hands tightened on his pole. They'll be angry. They already are, Sable replied. She shouldered her satchel. Tell Lysa to keep her door latched. And Odrin. He looked at her like a frightened animal. If you hear a voice that sounds like me, she said, you do not answer. Odrin nodded so hard his cap nearly fell off. Sable stepped into the street. The fog was lighter in daylight but not kinder. It hung in drifts between buildings, clinging to corners like eavesdropping cloth. Lanterns burned anyway, a chain of small suns that the town pretended were ordinary. At the council hall, 2 men stood at the doors. Not guards, Ashen Hollow didn't call them that, but they had the stiff posture of men who had been told to be hard for the sake of order. Soryn, one said, blocking her path. You're not summoned. Sable lifted her chin. I'm not here to argue a notice, she said. I'm here because my work has been blamed for your fear. And because your warden should not be cornered alone. The man's eyes flicked toward her satchel. No tonics, he warned. Sable kept her voice calm. No tonics, she agreed, because she wasn't here to feed their narrative. She was here to keep a man from breaking. After a long heartbeat, the men stepped aside just enough for her to pass. Inside, the council hall smelled of damp wood and old ink. Brannick Holt stood at the center with 2 other council members, shoulders squared like he was delivering a sermon. Irius was near the far wall, lantern pole resting against his shoulder, posture rigid, too rigid. The silver stitching at his throat caught the weak light like frost. When Brannick saw Sable, his mouth tightened. Look at that, he said loudly. The problem walks in on its own feet. Sable didn't rise to the bait. Her gaze found Irius. His eyes flicked to her for a heartbeat, and in that flicker she saw warning. Not for himself. For her. Apothecary, Brannick said, savoring the word like a stain. We've ordered you to cease your experiments. They aren't experiments, Sable said evenly. They are medicines. Measured. Tested. Used to reduce harm. Harm? Brannick snapped. The dead rose in a procession after you started talking to them like their neighbors. You put names on the wind. You encouraged people to look into the fog. Sable felt heat flare in her chest. I told them not to answer voices. I told them to hold their line. I told them to keep their lanterns lit. You saw it. Brannick's eyes gleamed. And yet the fog calls you, he said, leaning forward. By name. In the street. In front of everyone. What does that tell us? It tells you that the fog is clever, Sable thought. It tells you that fear makes you stupid. She kept her face composed. It tells you I'm a target, she said. Which means I am useful to the fog if I am isolated. Shutting my door doesn't protect the town. It protects your pride. A murmur ran through the hall. Brannick's cheek twitched. Mind your tongue. Sable's voice dropped. Mind your bargain. Silence tightened, as if the air itself had been stitched. One of the councilwomen's eyes widened. What do you know of bargains? Sable's gaze slid to Threnna Quill, who sat in the back like a shadow carved into a chair. The archivist's mouth was a thin line, her hands folded tightly. She did not speak. But her presence was a warning all its own. There were truths Brannick didn't want aired. Brannick recovered first. This is not about old stories, he said sharply. This is about stability. Warden Veylan, he turned, voice shifting into something smoother. You will enforce the suspension. Sable watched the line of Irius's jaw tighten. He didn't answer immediately. Brannick stepped closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a confidence. You've kept us alive by being strict, he said. By refusing softness. Don't let her make you careless. The words hit Irius like a hook. Sable saw it, the old leash of duty, the habit of self-denial. Irius's gaze went to the floor for a heartbeat. When he looked up again, the discipline in his eyes was edged with something raw. I will keep the town alive, he said. Brannick smiled, triumphant. Irius's gaze slid, then, to Sable. And I will not let you use my duty as an excuse to punish healing, he added, voice low but clear. The smile on Brannick's face cracked. You will obey the council, Brannick hissed. I obey the mistline, Irius replied, and the way he said it carried a warning that wasn't only political. And the mistline is changing. Brannick's eyes flashed. Because of her. Irius's hand tightened on his lantern pole. The silver stitching at his throat glinted as he spoke, each syllable controlled. Because something is pressing, he said. Harder than before. Sable's skin prickled. She felt it too, an unease in the air, a tautness like rope pulled tight. Then, faintly, from beyond the hall's walls, a sound rose. A low, wet dragging. Not one scrape. Many. The murmur in the hall died. Faces turned toward the doors. The fog outside thickened so quickly it felt like someone had poured it. A whisper slid through the cracks in the wood like cold breath. Open. The word was soft and endless, repeating, not a shout but a persistence. Open. 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 Sable's pulse spiked. She swallowed bright salt without thinking, the bitterness biting her tongue. Brannick's eyes went wide. This is your doing, he accused, voice trembling with rage and fear. Sable's voice came sharp. No, she snapped. This is your panic feeding it. The doors rattled. A hand thumped against the wood from outside, slow, deliberate. Then another. Then many, a rhythm like a gathering storm. Irius moved instantly. He strode to the doors and planted his lantern pole across them like a bar, one hand braced against the wood. Back, he ordered. Lanterns up. No names. The council members stumbled backward. Someone began to pray under their breath and then clamped a hand over their mouth as if the prayer itself might be an answer. Sable's eyes scanned the hall. The lanterns along the walls were lit, but their flames were wavering, bending toward the doors as if drawn. She felt the fog pressing at the edges of her mind, not in words yet, but in sensation, in temptation. Just look, just listen, just respond. A new voice slid through the wood, clearer. Sable. Her name, spoken like a promise. People's eyes snapped to her. Sable's chest tightened. She did not answer. She kept her mouth closed so hard her jaw ached. The voice warmed, familiar. My girl, it murmured, her mentor's cadence, gentle and proud. Come closer. Let me see you. Grief surged like nausea. Sable tasted it, sharp and involuntary, and hated the fog for knowing that grief could be a lever. Across the room, Irius stiffened. The silver stitching at his throat glinted brighter as if it were tightening in response to the pressure. Then the voice changed, quick as a knife turning. Iri. The child shortening again, sweet as poison. Iri, it hurts, it pleaded. It's cold. Please. Irius's breath hitched. Sable felt her blood turn to ice. It wasn't only trying to pull him into a reply. It was trying to split his discipline by twisting love into a weapon. She stepped toward him, slow, deliberate, careful not to jostle anyone into panic. Brannick grabbed her sleeve. "Don't you move," he hissed. "You'll." Sable yanked free. "Let go," she said, and the steel in her voice made him flinch. "You don't get to hold me while the fog holds him." Irius's eyes flicked toward her. They were wide, wet, terrified, held on the edge of an old wound. Sable stopped a few paces away, close enough that he could see her clearly in lantern light. She did not touch him. Not without permission. She did not restrain. She did not command. She offered. "Irius," she whispered, voice contained within the hall, not thrown toward the door. "Look at me." His gaze clung to her like a drowning man. The voice outside pressed harder. "Iri," it begged. "Please. I'm right here." Irius's lips parted on a breath. Sable's heart hammered. She could see the war inside him, discipline versus longing, duty versus the child who had once wanted to help. Sable took one slow breath. "You are not 9 anymore," she whispered. "And you are not alone." The silver stitching at Irius's throat flared bright in the lantern glow as if it were pulling tight. Pain flashed across his face. His free hand clutched at his collar as if he could hold his own throat together. Sable's chest clenched. "It's hurting you," she said, horror threading her voice. "It always does," Irius rasped. The doors shuddered. A hinge creaked. The fog's whisper seeped into the room like water. For the first time, Sable felt it inside her ear, close, intimate. "Answer," it breathed. Just one word. She swallowed bright salt again, grit scraping her tongue. In the back of the hall, Threnna Quill stood abruptly. Her chair scraped loud on the floor, a sound that cut through the fog's murmuring like a slap. "Enough," Threnna snapped, voice sharp as flint. She strode forward, eyes blazing. "Halt, you fool. You keep invoking old fear without understanding old words." Brannick whirled on her, startled. "This is not the time." "This is precisely the time," Threnna hissed. She jabbed a finger toward Irius. "The bind is tightening. If it tightens further, it won't keep the seam shut, it will tear it. Your warden will become the door you dread." Brannick's face went pale. It's true," Threnna cut in. "The stitches were meant as a stopgap. Not a lifetime cage." Her gaze flicked to Sable, reluctant but urgent. "And you, Apothecary, you have been treating symptoms when the sickness is in the heart." Sable's stomach dropped. "His heart," she whispered. Threnna's expression hardened. "The morrow mist does not feed on death," she said loudly, as if forcing the hall to hear truth over whisper. "It feeds on answered grief. On reflex. On the need to reply when something you love calls." The fog pressed at the doors, rattling them in rage, as if it hated being named. Irius's breath came shallow, pained. The silver stitching at his throat glinted like wire pulled too tight. Sable stepped closer. "How do we stop it?" she demanded, voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. "How do we end it?" Threnna swallowed, and for the first time she looked old. "The bargain was written with a mouth," she said. "It can only be rewritten with a mouth." Brannick's eyes widened. "No." Threnna glared at him. "Yes. You want stability? Then listen. The old clause was this: deny the mist no voice. That was the town's promise." She lifted her chin. "But there is a loophole in the old language. Not one halt once spoken." Sable's pulse hammered. "What is it?" Threnna's gaze went to Irius, and her voice softened only slightly. "The mist can claim a reply," she said. "But it cannot digest what is freely chosen and clearly bound. It cannot take what is offered without coercion, in lantern light, with witnesses, with names spoken by consent." Sable's breath caught. "A vow. Not a bargain whispered to fog. A vow made in light." The fog hissed through the door like an animal hearing its prey slip away. Outside, the voice sharpened. "Iri," it snarled, sweetness gone. "Door. Open." Irius convulsed with pain. The silver stitching at his throat flared and then, Horrifyingly, a thin line of red welled beneath one stitch, as if the thread were cutting in. Sable's blood went cold. Irius, she whispered, panic rising. His knees buckled. He sagged against the doors, still holding them shut, but his strength was failing. Sable moved without thinking and slipped under his bracing arm, taking some of his weight. His coat was damp and cold. His body trembled. "Do not let it hear you," he rasped near her ear. Don't say." "I won't," Sable whispered fiercely, voice directed into his collar, into him, not outward. She pressed her forehead briefly against his shoulder, an instinctive anchor, intimate but not improper, a wordless promise. The pressure at the doors surged. A hinge groaned again. Threnna's voice cut through the chaos. "If the seam tears tonight, it won't just be a few remnants," she shouted. "It will be the whole town's grief rising at once. And the mist will have its door." Brannick looked like he might vomit. "What do we do?" he croaked, and for the first time he sounded like a man rather than a councilman. Sable's mind raced. Lantern light, witnesses, names by consent, fine, later, but Irius was bleeding now. The bind was strangling him. She needed to ease the stitches without breaking them. She needed to loosen a knot without untying the rope. Sable's hand flew to her satchel. She pulled out the clearest warming draught she had, valerian, ginger, peat rose, bright salt. Not enough. Her eyes snagged on Threnna's words. Breath, ash, names. Ash. Not grave ash. Not unknown. Kill ash, clean and true, the ash of worked fire. Sable grabbed a tiny vial from her satchel, a pinch of kill ash she had kept sealed since her arrival. Her fingers shook so hard the glass clicked against her teeth when she uncorked it. "I need a cup," she said sharply. Odrin, somehow in the hall now, pale as a candle, thrust one into her hands. Sable poured a finger of warming draught, then tapped in the faintest dusting of kill ash, just enough to ground the mixture in, ending without inviting death. Her mentor's voice echoed in memory, "Measure, always measure. The wrong amount turns medicine into poison." She held the cup to Irius's mouth. "Drink," she whispered. He shook his head violently, pain flashing. "No, if you. I am not answering the fog," Sable hissed through clenched teeth. "I am answering you. Drink. Please." The last word was a risk plea shaped like a reply, but she kept it tight, pressed into his collar, not thrown into the air. Irius's gaze flicked to her, wild. He seemed to weigh the danger of taking anything from anyone. Then, with a shuddering breath, he drank. The draught was bitter. He coughed once, and the sound made the silver stitching flare, but then his breath shifted, deepened, steadied a fraction. Sable watched his throat, the line of the stitches. The red-welled spot did not spread. The glint of the silver softened, ever so slightly, like a tightened cord easing. "It's warm," Irius rasped, stunned, as if he had forgotten what warmth felt like inside him. Sable's eyes burned. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Just stay." Outside, the fog's voice changed tactics again, sliding into softness. "Sable," it coaxed, gentle as a hand. "I can give him peace. Just say yes." Sable clenched her teeth. She did not answer. She forced her gaze to the lantern flame, then back to Irius's eyes. Irius trembled. His lips parted. Sable's heart lurched. Threnna's voice snapped. "Do not speak to it," she barked at the hall. "Do not bargain. You bargain and it learns your taste." Brannick's face contorted with terror. "It's calling." "Shut your mouth," Threnna said, vicious, and the bluntness startled silence into place. The pressure at the doors surged again, then, strangely, paused. As if the fog were listening, recalculating. In that brief lull, Irius sagged against Sable, breath coming in shaky pulls. "It wants me to answer," he whispered, pain threading every word. "I know," Sable whispered back. "I know." His eyes squeezed shut. "If I say anything." "You won't," Sable said, voice fierce and tender all at once. "Not to it." His breathing hitched. "Sable, if it uses my voice." "I won't answer," she said immediately, remembering his earlier demand, the strange intimacy of that promise. "I promised." A shudder went through him, and Sable felt the weight of that promise settle like a shield between them. Then the fog did something new. The whisper at the door stopped. The dragging outside ceased. Silence fell so abruptly that it felt like a vacuum. Sable's skin prickled. Silence in Ashen Hollow was rarely peace. It was often the pause before a worse thing. A single knock sounded. Not frantic. Not many hands. Just one. Slow. Measured. Then a voice, soft as velvet, came through the wood. Not her mentor. Not a sister. Not a friend. It was Irius's voice. Sable, it said gently. Open. It's safe. Sable's blood turned to ice. Every instinct in her body surged toward answering, toward speaking his name, toward calling him back, toward tearing the door open to prove she could reach him. She forced herself to breathe. She forced herself to look at the real Irius in front of her, pale, shaking, bleeding beneath silver stitches, his weight against her shoulder. The voice outside repeated, perfectly. Sable. Open. It's safe. Tears stung her eyes. The fog was cruel. It wasn't only trying to claim a reply. It was trying to make love itself feel like the trap. Sable swallowed bright salt so hard it scraped her throat. She kept her voice inside the room, inside her own chest. I see you, she whispered to the real man. Not it. Irius's eyes fluttered open, dazed. He stared at her as if he couldn't understand why she wasn't moving. Sable lifted her hand slowly, asking again with her eyes. Irius's throat worked. He gave a tiny nod. Sable cupped his cheek through his glove-free side, skin cold, stubbled, real. Her touch was steady, grounding. Stay, she whispered. Please stay. The voice outside changed, turning sharp with frustration. Open. The doors shuddered once more, harder than before. The bar of Irius's lantern pole scraped. Sable felt the hinge strain. Threnna's eyes snapped to the ceiling beams, then to the lanterns. It's pressing the whole hall, she breathed, horror dawning. It's trying to make the town answer by force. Brannick looked around wildly. What does it want? Threnna's jaw clenched. A reply, she said. Any reply. Even a scream. Even a name. Sable's mind raced. If the hall broke, panic would answer for them. The fog would feed, and the seam would tear wider than it ever had. She looked at Irius, at the way the silver stitching had softened with the draught, but still glinted with strain. She looked at Threnna, at the truth she had finally spat out after years of silence. She looked at Brannick, at a man whose fear had become policy. Witnesses. Lantern light. Names by consent. A vow. But not tonight, not like this, not as a desperate bargaining chip while the hall shook. The mist would twist desperation into coercion. No. The vow had to be freely chosen. So tonight, they needed only one thing, to survive without replying. Sable lifted her voice, controlled, clear, directed to the living people in the hall. Put your hands over your mouths, she ordered, and the authority in her tone made them obey before pride could argue. If you have to breathe loud, breathe. But do not speak. Odrin pressed both hands to his lips, eyes huge. Sable turned to the lanterns. Raise them, she said, and several townsfolk lifted wall lanterns higher, flames trembling. The light brightened. The fog hissed. The pressure at the doors surged, then faltered, as if light offended it. Sable kept her gaze on the real Irius. Can you stand? She whispered. He shook, but he nodded once. Sable tightened her grip under his arm, helping him shift his weight. The moment he moved away from the doors, the wood shuddered again, desperate. Irius forced himself upright, jaw clenched. He lifted his lantern pole with shaking hands and rebraced it higher, stronger, using his body less, the pole more. Sable saw the cost in his face, the way pain skittered under his skin like sparks. She reached into her satchel again and pulled out her last vial of killash draught. She did not offer it yet. Too much would weaken him. But she held it ready. Threnna stepped toward Sable, voice low. If you keep doing this, if you keep easing the bind, it will loosen, Sable finished, understanding with sick clarity. And if it loosens too much, the seam opens. Threnna nodded, grim. Yes. Sable's eyes burned. So he's trapped, she whispered. Either strangled by stitches or used as a door. Threnna's face tightened with shame. That is the shape of our cowardice, she said. We stitched a boy shut and called it safety. The hall groaned again, beams creaking as the fog pressed harder. Sable's heart pounded. Then we changed the shape, she whispered. Threnna's eyes flicked to her. How? Sable's gaze returned to Irius, to the man he was beneath the bind. By giving him something stronger than fear, she said. Threnna's mouth tightened. Love won't. It isn't love as a feeling, Sable cut in, voice fierce. It's love as choice. Consent. Clarity. A vow made in light. The fog hissed at the word vow as if it could taste it. Irius's shoulders jerked. No, he rasped, hearing enough to understand. His eyes went wide with horror. Don't do that because you're afraid. Sable swallowed, tears stinging. I won't, she whispered back, shaking her head. I won't trap you with my fear. I won't turn you into a bargain. His breath shuddered, and pain flickered across his face, pain not only from stitches, but from the idea that anyone would choose him freely. The hall shuddered again. A lantern flame guttered. A woman in the corner made a small, strangled sound. Sable spun. Hands, she snapped, and the woman clamped her mouth shut, eyes streaming. Sable's pulse hammered as she faced the doors again. The wood bowed inward slightly, as if something heavy leaned against it from outside. Then, as suddenly as it had pressed, the fog released. The doors stopped shuddering. The hall's beams creaked once, settling back into place. Silence fell, thick as ash. No dragging outside. No whisper. The lantern flames steadied. For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Hands remained clamped over mouths as if speech itself were a curse. Then the fog's voice returned, soft again, almost amused, slipping through the tiniest cracks. Soon, it murmured, a promise shaped like hunger. Soon you will answer. Everyone answers. Sable's stomach turned. Irius's hand trembled on his lantern pole. The silver stitching at his throat glinted faintly, still too tight, still too close to blood. Sable stepped close enough to speak into his collar, into him, where the fog couldn't claim it as a reply. We'll be ready, she whispered. Irius's eyes squeezed shut, pain and exhaustion washing over his face. I don't want you hurt, he rasped, voice barely there. It will use you. Sable's throat tightened. Then we won't give it anything easy to use, she whispered. Not my grief. Not your guilt. Not our fear. His breath shuddered, and he leaned the smallest fraction toward her, as if allowing himself that much support. Threnna looked at Sable, and for the first time her sharp expression softened into something like regret. If we are to rewrite what was done, she said quietly, it must be done properly. In lantern light. With witnesses. With no coercion. Sable nodded, eyes burning. And with a heart that isn't being strangled, she added. Threnna's gaze slid to Irius's throat, and she grimaced. Yes. Brannick Holt sagged against a table, trembling. His pride had been scraped raw by terror. If we let you continue, he whispered hoarsely, if we undo the suspension, will you fix it? Sable's eyes snapped to him, fury and compassion warring in her chest. Fix it. As if a man could be repaired like a cracked barrel. She forced her voice steady. I will do what is possible, she said. But you will not use him as your lock anymore. Brannick flinched like he'd been struck. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, remembering the rule. Sable turned back to Irius. His face was ashen, his eyes glassy with pain, but he was still standing. Still holding the line. She lifted her hand slightly, asking with her eyes. Irius's throat worked. He gave the smallest nod. Sable slid her fingers into his gloved hand, not squeezing, simply anchoring. Warmth offered, consent received. The contact was quiet, intimate, and utterly clean. Outside, the fog pressed against the hall like a listener denied its favorite song. Inside, in lantern light, Sable held the warden's hand and made herself a promise she did not speak aloud. She would not let fear decide the shape of their future. And she would not let the mist take a vow from desperation. If love was going to be the spell that freed him, it would be chosen steadily, publicly, and unafraid, so the fog could not twist it into a reply. The next morning the notice was gone from Sable's door. No apology replaced it. No official announcement. Just an empty nail hole and a street that avoided looking directly at her, as if shame were another kind of fog. Lysa arrived before noon with a basket of fresh beeswax candles and her jaw set like a woman ready to bite through stone. "They won't say it," she muttered, setting the basket on Sable's work table. "But they're frightened enough now to stop pretending you're the problem." Sable traced the edge of a candle absently. "Fear makes people cruel," she said. "Aye," Lysa replied, softer. "And sometimes fear makes them finally listen." Threnna Quill came later, alone, hood up, eyes sharp despite the tiredness that had settled into her face like new lines. She didn't sit. She paced the apothecary floor once as if measuring it, then stopped under Sable's lantern and spoke with the clipped urgency of someone who had delayed truth too long. "The hall will not hold a second press," Threnna said. "The mist tested the town's restraint and found cracks. It will press again, sooner now. It has learned that panic is plentiful." Sable's stomach tightened. "So we don't let panic answer for us," she said. Threnna's gaze flicked to the back room, where Irius stood with his coat still on as if he didn't trust himself to be comfortable. His face was pale. The silver stitching at his throat glinted faintly, less angry than the night before but still too tight, still too close to blood. Threnna swallowed. "We do not simply end a bargain," she said. "We replace it. With language the mist cannot twist." Sable's pulse hammered. "A vow," she murmured. Threnna nodded once. "In lantern light," she said. "With witnesses who will not be coerced into replying. With names spoken by consent so the mist cannot claim them as hooks." Her eyes sharpened. "And it must be offered freely. Not because the town demands it. Not because fear corners him." Sable's gaze slid to Irius. He met her eyes and, in that look, was all the conflict she had come to recognize, duty chained to guilt, tenderness chained to terror. He wanted safety for the town so badly he would cut pieces off himself to purchase it. But he did not want to trap her in that purchase. Sable took a slow breath. "Then we don't ask it of him," she said quietly. Threnna's expression tightened. "Someone must," she said. "Or you will watch him be strangled by stitches until his heart learns to open for the mist instead." Sable's hands curled. "Then we give him a third option," she whispered. "Not strangled. Not opened by force. Anchored by choice." Threnna studied her for a long moment, then nodded, reluctant but conceding. "The peat flats," she said. "At the old mistline stones. Tonight. The lantern hooks there are the oldest boundaries we have. The marks are not only warding, they are record. Witness. The stones remember truth." Lysa inhaled sharply. "You're bringing half the town out there," she demanded. "Only enough," Threnna said. "The ones who will hold their mouths shut and their lanterns high." Sable looked at Odrin, who hovered by the door like he had been assigned to fear itself. "Can you gather the lamplighters?" she asked softly. "The ones who won't panic." Odrin's eyes went huge. Then he swallowed hard and nodded. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I can." Sable turned back to Irius. He stood very still. "No," he said hoarsely before she could speak. Sable's throat tightened. "I didn't ask," she murmured. He flinched. The silver stitching at his throat caught the light. "I know what this is," he said, voice rough. "They will want you to bind yourself to me. To fix what I broke." Sable stepped closer, careful. "Not fix," she whispered. "Choose." His eyes shuttered. "You don't understand," he said, and the pain in the words wasn't only physical. "If you speak vows because you're afraid, it will rot them. It will turn them into a reply." Sable nodded, tears stinging. "Then hear me," she whispered. "I am afraid. But I am not choosing you because I'm afraid." She swallowed. "I'm choosing you because you have spent your life holding a door shut with your bare hands. And because when you could have used your duty to crush me, you didn't. You stood between me and the fog even when it hurt you." Irius's breath caught. His gaze flickered, startled, as if he didn't know how to receive praise without flinching. Sable didn't rush him. She held his gaze and let her words settle like medicine, measured, steady, not exaggerated. If you tell me no, she continued, voice soft, I will accept it. I will not make love into a cage for you. But if you want a future, if you want to live without being stitched shut, then let me stand with you, in light, in truth, by consent. For a long heartbeat, the apothecary was silent except for the faint hiss of the lantern flame. Then Irius's shoulders sagged the smallest fraction, like a man setting down a weight he'd forgotten he was carrying. He looked at her hand, still at her side, not reaching, then back into her eyes. I want, he said, and the simple confession sounded like tearing cloth. I want to stop being afraid of wanting. Sable's eyes burned. She nodded once. Then tonight, she whispered. Night came like a held breath releasing. Lanterns moved through the streets of Ashen Hollow in a slow procession, no bells, no singing, no names called out loud. Just the steady glow of flame and the soft crunch of boots on damp stone. Lysa walked near Sable, her shoulders squared. Odrin came with 2 other lamplighters, faces pale but determined, poles held like staffs. Threnna carried a bundle of old papers wrapped in oilcloth as if she were bringing history itself to the edge of the world. Irius walked beside Sable. Not a pace ahead. Not guarding from the front. Beside. That single shift felt like a vow in motion. As they reached the peat flats, the fog thickened, eager. It pressed close, curling around lantern light like fingers testing a seam. The old mist-lined stones rose from the black water, half-sunken, carved with looping marks and notches that caught the light like scars. Hooks of iron jutted from the stones, ancient and rusted. The lamplighters hung lanterns there one by one, raising a ring of flame that carved a bright circle in the dark. Threnna paced the circle's edge and poured bright salt in a deliberate line, careful to leave no gaps. Boundary, she murmured, not to the fog, but to the stones, recording the intent where the mist could not twist it. Sable stood with Irius at the circle's center. Her hands shook, but she held them still. Her satchel rested at her feet, heavier with the draught she had brewed all day, warming infusion with the faintest dusting of clean kill ash, meant to loosen the bind without tearing flesh or seam. Medicine, not magic. Or perhaps the truest kind of magic, because it obeyed rules. Threnna faced them. No one speaks into the fog, she said, voice low but carrying within lantern light. No one answers any voice that comes. If you must breathe, breathe. If you must weep, weep. But do not speak. Lysa pressed her lips together and nodded. The lamplighters lifted their lanterns higher. The fog shifted, listening. A whisper rose beyond the circle. Sable. Her name slid through the darkness like a silk thread. The voice was warm, proud, her mentor's cadence perfect. My girl, it murmured. You've brought them all. Good. Now say yes. Sable's heart lurched. Tears stung her eyes. The fog always chose the softest knife. She did not answer. She kept her gaze on the lantern flames until the urge to reply passed like a wave. Then the voice changed, quick as a predator adjusting. Iri, it called, sweet as childhood. Please. It's cold. Irius went rigid. The silver stitching at his throat caught the lantern light, and Sable saw the subtle tightening, the way the bind reacted not only to pain, but to longing. Sable turned slightly toward him, close enough that he could see her clearly. She did not touch him yet. She waited for permission even here. Irius's eyes flicked to her, wild, then softened a fraction. He gave the smallest nod. Sable reached up and rested her hand lightly at his collarbone, just below the stitched line, warm skin, steady pressure, an anchor offered and accepted. Stay, she whispered, not to the fog, but to him, inside the circle. The fog hissed, offended by words it could not claim. Threnna lifted her chin. Now, she said. Sable picked up the cup she had prepared. Her fingers trembled as she held it to Irius's lips. Only if you choose, she whispered. Irius's throat worked. He nodded once, and drank. The draught slid down, and Sable watched the silver stitching with breath held. A faint flush rose in Irius's cheeks. His shoulders loosened a fraction. The glint of the stitches softened, as if the thread had stopped biting so hard into his breath. He exhaled, slow and shaky. The fog pressed closer. A voice rose again, sharper. Open, it whispered. Answer. Sable swallowed bright salt and did not look beyond lantern light. She didn't need to. She could feel the mist like cold fingers against her thoughts. Threnna spoke clearly, voice contained within the circle. State your names, she said, and the phrasing was careful, deliberate, an invitation, not a demand. Sable looked at Irius. Her pulse hammered so loud she could almost hear it over the fog. Do you still want this? She asked softly. Irius's eyes held hers. Pain lived there. Fear too. But beneath it, something steadier, something that had begun to grow in the weeks of small permissions and shared lantern light. Yes, he whispered. The word was quiet, but it was his. Sable nodded, and only then did she speak her name, not tossed into darkness, but placed into lantern light like a stone set in mortar. I am Sable Soryn, she said. The fog shivered as if tasting the name and finding no hook. Irius swallowed, face tightening as the bind tugged at him. Old habit, old punishment. Sable watched him, hand still at his collarbone, steady. He drew in a breath, slow, controlled, and spoke. I am Irius Veylan. The lantern flames steadied. The circle held. The fog hissed, and for the first time it sounded angry rather than hungry. Threnna lifted the oilcloth bundle and unwrapped it, revealing an old parchment, faded ink, archaic script, the recorded language of the original bargain. She did not read it aloud. Not a word of it. She only held it up within lantern light as proof that the town had once spoken into darkness and regretted it. Then she lowered it and said, Speak what you choose. Not to the mist. To each other. Make it clear. Make it bound. Sable's throat tightened. She turned fully toward Irius, keeping her voice low and steady, her words simple so they could not be twisted. Irius, she said, and even speaking his name felt like a tender risk. She watched him carefully, ready to stop if pain overtook him. He didn't flinch this time. His eyes stayed on hers. I choose you, Sable continued, voice trembling but unwavering. Not because the town wants it. Not because the fog demands it. Because I have seen who you are when no one thanks you, when fear is loud and you still hold the line. Her eyes burned. I will not answer any voice that tries to wear your face. I will not let the mist turn our love into a trap. I will stand with you in light and truth. If you will have me. The fog pressed against the circle like a storm trying to break a door. A voice rose, her mentor again, pleading. Sable, don't. You'll regret it. Say no. Sable did not answer. She did not even glance toward the sound. Irius's breath shook. His jaw clenched, and the silver stitching at his throat glinted as if searching for a way to tighten. He lifted his hand slowly, as if he was afraid to touch anything tender, and covered Sable's hand at his collarbone, anchoring her touch rather than fleeing it. I choose you, he said, voice rough with emotion he didn't know how to carry. Not as penance. Not as duty. As myself. He swallowed, and pain flickered, but he pushed through without forcing. I will not use fear to keep you away. I will not let the mist decide what I deserve. I will learn to live, with my heart unstitched by terror. His eyes shone. If you will have me. Sable's breath broke into a quiet sob. She nodded once, unable to speak without risking a reply-shaped sound. Threnna's voice came firm. Seal it, she said. With consent. With clarity. Sable met Irius's gaze, asking with her eyes. Irius nodded. Sable leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, no kiss demanded by spectacle, no hunger, only closeness and shared breath within lantern light. Irius exhaled shakily, and the bind at his throat did not punish him for it. If anything, the silver glint softened further, as if the stitches were finally being taught that warmth was not weakness. The fog screamed without sound, a pressure that slammed against the circle. Lantern flames bent, but did not go out. The salt line held. The stones, old witnesses, held. And then, like a knot slipping loose, the pressure released. A wind moved across the peat flats. The fog tore away from the circle in shreds, not vanishing entirely but thinning, pulled back as if something had yanked its teeth out of the seam. Shapes appeared at the edge of lantern light, remnants, drawn close by the upheaval, standing like tired people waiting at the end of a long road. A man with net-rough hands clutching twine. A girl holding a basket. The kill woman Sable had soothed with the lullaby whistle. They were not frantic now. They were quiet. Sable's heart clenched. She stepped to the salt line and spoke softly, still inside the circle, still careful. You may go, she whispered, not to the fog, but to them, offering release. One by one, the remnant's shoulders loosened. The man's twine fell from his fingers. The girl's basket tipped, apples rolling into black water and disappearing without a splash. The kill woman lifted her face toward the lanterns as if feeling warmth for the first time in years. Then they faded, not dissolving violently, not dragged away, but thinning like breath in cold air, gone on a sigh that did not ask for anything in return. The fog beyond the stones settled into something quieter, still present, still damp, but no longer pressing like hunger. It became weather again. A veil, not a mouth. Irius swayed, suddenly exhausted. Sable caught him, both arms around his waist now, unafraid to hold him openly. His breath came in shaky pulls. He lifted a trembling hand to his throat, fingers brushing the silver stitching. It loosened, he whispered, disbelief threading his voice. Sable looked. The stitches were still there, but the angry tightness had eased. The faint redness beneath the thread had faded. He swallowed without flinching. Tears blurred her vision. You're still here, she whispered. Irius let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so close to sobbing. So are you, he rasped, voice breaking on the truth. Threnna stood very still, eyes wet, as if witnessing the end of a sentence she had been afraid to finish for decades. Lysa wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand and pretended it was only the wind. Odrin lifted his lantern higher, trembling, and for the first time his fear looked like it was sharing space with awe. In the weeks that followed, Ashen Hollow changed the way it breathed. The council never issued a formal apology, but Brannick Holt stopped trying to govern by silence alone. Lanterns still burned, because caution was wise, but people began to build new rituals that didn't feed the fog, farewells spoken in circles of light, names shared only within thresholds, bright salt kept in every pocket not as a charm but as a reminder to choose. Sable's Apothecary became more than a shop. It became a place where grief could be held without being answered into darkness. People came to her to soothe coughs and mend hands, yes, but also to finish the small human tasks that kept tethers from tightening, letters dictated, rings returned, apologies spoken aloud in lantern light. Irius did not remain a solitary warden. He trained others, Odrin among them, teaching boundaries and breath and the difference between listening and replying. The mist line became a shared duty, not one man's penance. Irius still walked the fog edges at night, lantern pole in hand, but he did it with a partner now, and sometimes he returned to Sable's shop and allowed himself to sit, to drink tea, to be warmed without flinching. Their courtship, if it could be called that, grew in the quiet spaces left behind by fear. Walks in early morning when the fog was thin and the world looked new. Shared meals in Lysa's back room. Small touches asked for and given, fingers brushing, hands held, the simple intimacy of leaning shoulder to shoulder while Sable ground herbs and Irius repaired lantern glass. When he finally asked, he did it without spectacle. It was late afternoon, the lanterns burning anyway, and Sable was labeling jars when Irius stepped into her shop and stood very still as if still learning how to be in warmth without bracing. I have a question, he said. Sable looked up, eyebrows lifting. That sounds dangerous coming from you. His mouth twitched, the smallest hint of a smile. It is. He reached into his coat and pulled out a plain ring, silver, but not stitched into skin, not a bind. A circle hammered smooth, set with a tiny shard of amber that looked like captured lantern light. I don't want to be a door, he said quietly. I don't want to be only a warden. I want to be a husband. His throat worked. If you still choose me. Sable's breath hitched. Tears sprang hot and sudden. She stepped closer, took the ring with shaking fingers, and met his eyes. I choose you, she whispered. Every day. Irius exhaled as if he had been holding that breath for years. They married at the mist-lined stones in daylight, lanterns hung anyway, not from fear now, but from tradition rewritten. Lysa made candles with peat rose scent, and Threnna brought clean parchment to record vows that would never be offered to Fog. The lamplighters lined the path with flame. The town attended quietly, not because silence was demanded, but because reverence had finally replaced superstition. Sable wore a simple gown with a shawl the color of dawn through mist. Irius wore his coat, but his collar was lower now, the silver stitching visible not as a shame, but as history. He swallowed without pain when he spoke his vows, and his voice did not shake when he said her name. Afterward, when they returned to the apothecary, Sable set a new sign above the door, a mortar and pestle carved fresh, the old scratched name sanded away. Beneath it, she painted in careful letters, Sable Soryn, Apothecary. Lantern light healing. It made Lysa snort at the spelling, but her eyes softened. Seasons turned. The fog came and went like weather, thick some nights, thin others, but it no longer pressed at doors with hunger. When the dead rose now, which happened rarely, they came like tired travelers finishing a last step, and they left with warmth instead of cold. And one evening, when Sable stood behind her work table grinding herbs, she realized she was counting her breaths differently. Not because she was listening for voices. Because her body was changing. She found Irius by the lantern hook outside their door, checking the glass out of habit more than need. He looked up when she stepped close, concern flickering as if he still expected danger. Sable took his hand openly, without asking now because they had built a life where touch was safe, and guided it to her abdomen. Irius, she whispered, voice bright with wonder and trembling with tears, we're not alone. His hand went still. His eyes widened, disbelieving, then softened until something in him broke open in the gentlest way. He swallowed, no flinch, no stitch tightening, and then he laughed, a quiet sound that sounded like someone learning air. Sable leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her carefully, reverently, as if holding a miracle required consent too. Outside, fog drifted down the street and did not speak first. Lanterns burned steady, and in the warmth of their doorway, Sable and Irius stood together, married, safe, expecting their first child, unafraid of the future because they had learned how to choose it in the light.